Call the City Council work session meeting to order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilperson Felder.
Present.
Whitman.
Present.
Michelangeli.
Present.
Ryan.
Here.
Germaine.
Here.
Lamore.
Here.
Mayor Clark.
Present. So we have a work session. We have a couple items that our Assistant City Manager, Mr. Sal. Any presentations, or are you going to just have him start?
Introduce Barry Leroy. He's up for the first presentation to discuss the Exeter Township water project.
Very good. Hello, Barry.
Is that better? All right, I'll get really close.
There you go.
All right. Okay, so I'm here to discuss and present a memorandum of understanding with Exeter Township, going over a water main loop that we're proposing up in the township. It's on Schofield Road. It would be coordinated with a special assessment district that the township's proposing to take on for a water district expansion as well. In 2020, we executed a memorandum of understanding for Raisin Street. Is a water main loop up in the township. The township's wants to close a lot of these dead end loops as well as us. We have that tied in with our asset management plan. We completed. We have that tied in with our water agreements with the township, tied in with a couple of districts, and they're coordinated with the special assessment district. So we take advantage of that where we can to kind of meet both the goals and objectives of both the township and the water department. So this particular location, I'll pull up a graphic in a minute, but Schofield water main loop, it's recommended because it meets our goals and objectives. It will help us reduce water loss. Right now we flush two dead ends. One of them's a hydrant that we do monthly, and the other one's an auto flusher that flushes every day. The loop is, again, mentioned as it's part of our water asset management plan in 2035. We've paid for these projects in the past through overage of system development fee surplus that we collect in the township for new connections. And again, this will be coordinated with a West Newburgh special assessment district for a water main project. This graphic is it's a Schofield Road. You can see over here on the left is Sumter Road. It's on the west side. Steffes is on the east. There's two 8-inch stubs that are coming off of both of those mains, and this project would just be an infill. And it would, again, here's the hydrant on the left that is flushed monthly, and then the auto flushers here on the right. So it's a pretty simple project, but it's coordinated with, again, the special assessment in the township through their process. And they would be taking on a capital improvement bond. Mm-hmm. The cost for the Schofield Loop is about $428,000. That includes all design, engineering, permitting, etc. So with that cost, so far, based on the overage of system development fee through last fiscal year, we have a little over $94,000 that's been collected. If we taking that off of the total cost would leave about $333,000 that would be needed to be paid off. The township would front all these costs, so there'd be no out-of-pocket money to other than some of the conditions in the MOU. We'd also offer a one-time $50,000 credit for not having to flush the mains anymore. The savings, the cost to push water out there and flush to maintain water quality, as well as improving the reliability of the water system. We were working with the bond council and their finance folks, and they recommend a minimum of $31,000 be paid on an annual basis. That would give us a payback of around 10 years. So the surplus system development fee, which is about $94,000, plus the $50,000 credit, would need to be paid within 30 days of the bond closing. That would, and I'll give you a schedule roughly that we're estimating at this time. The excuse me, the one-time flushing credit would be used for help reimbursing the township for like survey design, engineering, permitting, and the bond closing costs. Is what they intend to use it for. The annual, so every year as new water connections are made in the township, we would reconcile that and have to make a payment by September 30th. We would budget for this as an expense once a year. And the average, like a 5-year running average, is around 38,000, what we've collected from the township on an annual basis. So if we budget a little more money, we can pay it back quicker. But obviously that's depending on the market. All other provisions of the water agreement with Exeter Township would be maintained with this MOU. And this last slide is just a rough implementation schedule. Both the City Council and Exeter Township are having presentations done, and the MOU would be put in front of them for consideration. I'm proposing to bring this on the December 20th council meeting for consideration. Between December and March, we would go through the survey, design, engineering, and bids, and the bond closing. March and April is around that time frame is when we're expecting the bond to likely close, in which we would then be required to pay the township those $144,000. And then construction would happen after that through April through November of next year. And just, every September 30th, that would be the cutoff date for us to make a payment to the township based on our prior year collection for system development fees. So it's a lot of information, but it's a pretty simple project, but the funding would pay for itself through new connections. So is there any questions?
Andrew, and then I'll come back.
So the 94 plus the $50,000 we'd be paying up front. That's your 144. Why not just discount that off the 31 that they'd be paying us every year?
Well, it would be. I mean, we would have about a $333,000 balance starting off after we make that payment, and then we're obligated every year to pay down that debt.
Oh, okay. All right.
Michelle?
Who pays for the maintenance? Is there a yearly maintenance on the lines or?
Yeah, it would become a public main. So it would be meeting all of our standards. So then the water department would be responsible for maintaining the water system, hydrants, valves out there. Yes. So those costs would be built into our overhead costs.
In the budget, for a yearly budget, that'll be covered. All right, thank you.
Brian?
Yeah, have they seen this already at Exeter Township, or they have yet to go through this yet?
Yes, they're very familiar with this. They're planning on considering it at their 21st meeting, I believe.
Okay,
So-
have you heard any feedback from them?
No, they seem so very supportive of it, though.
Good.
Other questions? Well, Barry, I'll just say that that we've had some conversations on Exeter Township and some projects in the past the council has, and this brings one of those together and just makes sense by how it's presented, but also less work that has to be done in cleaning the lines, and in the long run, it benefits all. So
Yeah.
that's how I see it. So if there's no other questions. Mr. Sal, anything further?
Nothing from me. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Barry. I think
All
we're
right.
good for now.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
I think next, Mr. Cochran's going to present. Mr. Sal, any comments to start, or?
Just have Mr. Cochran do his presentation on the city-owned property inventory analysis.
Give me just 1 second.
Up, I just, for those here, and of course, that watch the council, we've had this conversation on our city owned property inventory. We've asked for the analysis and then a presentation when we understand what all that is. And I know that Mr. Cochran, along with the assessing department and others, have worked on this to give us an idea where all these properties are, what the size are they buildable, are they not, is there plans for them? So I'm looking forward to seeing this. Mark, go ahead, please.
Honorable Mayor, City Council, Mark Cochran, Assistant to the City Manager and Economic Development Director. As the mayor indicated, last year we were getting quite a bit of requests coming in routinely from property owners or tenants who were requesting to own city-owned property, generally that was within close proximity or adjacent to their property. And so it begged the question, we had the discussion with City Council about what is all the city-owned property, how much do we have, and what do we want to do with it? And so over the past few months, working with our asset management specialist, Kim Rieger, in the GIS department, we did a comprehensive inventory of all city-owned property. The packets that you have and the map that's on the screen right now doesn't show all city-owned property. This is just property that is either not a city facility, a park, an infrastructure asset, or is deed restricted by the Natural Resources Trust Fund acquisition project. And so the inventory that you have handed out that's also on the screen shows that there are 96 parcels that are owned by the city, totaling just over 207 acres out of the 6,500 acres total in the city. About 138 of those properties are the high property. Generally, we refer to the high property, which is the large green parcel that you'll see outlined toward the northeast boundary of the city behind North Dixie Highway in the Michigan Avenue Mason Run neighborhood. 13 of those parcels, or 3.5 acres, are within the Heritage Corridor Master Plan boundaries and should be reserved as such for implementation. So on the spreadsheet that you have at the top, there's some about 13 parcels that are yellow. Those are owned by the city in the Heritage Corridor, but those were not purchased or associated with the Natural Resources Trust Fund, so they don't have a deed restriction or any restrictions on them. The screen just went.
Let's see.
So each property that's remaining was then analyzed against the recently updated zoning code to determine whether it was legally conforming and buildable or not. So out of the 83 properties that remained, 45 parcels, or just under 5 acres, are non-conforming, and those are the ones that are outlined in red or highlighted in red on the spreadsheet. And then 38 parcels are legally conforming and buildable, which represents about 66.5 acres. That doesn't include the high property or the 25 acres that are part of the Lazy Boy headquarters site, former Lazy Boy headquarters site, currently in the redevelopment process. So that's generally the inventory analysis, and then what I did after that is went through and looked at each and individual parcel, whether it was conforming or non-conforming, and presented a recommendation or a list of questions for future discussion that we would be seeking some guidance from City Council on. So as a general policy recommendation, City Administration is recommending that we either combine the smaller parcels, these are for the 45 non-conforming lots, combine the smaller parcels with the adjacent property as long as it is owner occupied. And out of the 45, 7 of those are adjacent to owner occupied properties. If the adjacent property or properties are not owner occupied, administration recommends that the city retains ownership until such time that they may become owner occupied. An example of that is recently I received a phone call from a tenant who was renting a property over on Franklin Street, I believe it was. And we had a conversation. I mentioned that the practice that the city has had recently is to convey the property only if it's owner occupied, not if it's a rental. And she said, well, I'm in the process of purchasing it. And I said, okay, well, at that point, after you purchase it, then give me a phone call back and we can have a discussion about including that as your parcel to expand your yard, make your yard bigger. And so we're going through that process right now as she's going through the process to purchase that. So additional recommendations for those would be retaining ownership for strategic purposes, such as the regional non-motorized trail plan, which are the properties generally part of the old rail line going along 7th Street to Front Street. Hanging on to those as we develop the trail plan or until the Orchard East sub-area plan is completed. And so we've had discussions with city council, and I know the city manager is in the process of hopefully moving that project ahead soon with the properties that are on the Winchester Street corridor or in the Orchard East, hanging on to those as we develop the master plan and sub-area plan for the Orchard East neighborhood. And there's 5 of those properties that you'll see on the spreadsheet. Additionally, there's a few lots, non-conforming lots that could be combined together because they're adjacent to each other and made available for residential infill development. And you'll see that noted on the spreadsheet as well. 3 lots that I did want to bring forward for discussion are 3 lots on North Dixie Highway on the north side of the John Dingle Bridge that could be marketed for commercial development, although accessibility to those is a problem. And you'll see I can expand the map on the screen, but you've also got the map separated into quadrants printed for you. But these 3 lots, we had originally started talking about retaining those to develop a gateway feature, welcome to the city sort of monument and park on North Dixie Highway for those who are entering the city. But recently I was driving down Dixie Highway and I remembered that there's already signage, gateway signage in Heck Park that's owned by the county. It still says welcome to historic Monroe with the old city logo, so it needs to be updated anyway, which we could then sell these properties for commercial development, although it is a little challenge to get access them. As you see on the screen, you have to go off Detroit Avenue, turn onto Dixie Drive, which butts up to residential, and so accessibility is an issue. But the future ideas and plans for that site has sort of shifted over the past year, and so certainly welcome to open to feedback and suggestions on those 3. So you don't see a recommendation on the spreadsheet for those. But again, generally for the non-conforming, the recommendation is to either combine them with the adjacent owner-occupied property to put them back on the tax rolls, allow the residents to have a little bit of a larger yard since properties aren't buildable anyway, or hang on to them until those become owner-occupied. So I'll pause there before I go on to the conforming and buildable properties.
Okay, that's probably going to be next, but I'll see if there's any questions right now. Mark, I noticed one, I think that's, because I see they're green and they're red means no. There was one I was looking at here. It's at the corner of 7th and Kaylani. It's kind of like just a little wooded lot there.
Yeah.
And I think about our discussions we've had recently on the loop trail and with the county and the townships. It may be something that gets appropriate for a what do I call a kind of a informational starting end kind of location on the trail. I don't know what else could be built there, but it could be commercial, I guess. I don't know what it's currently zoned as. So.
Yeah, it's zoned commercial. And that was a property I took a look at because that's also part of that abandoned rail line. However,
Right.
there's problems or challenges to get through the adjacent multifamily residential to move on with the rest of the trail. So that's one, it's conforming, and that's why it's outlined in green, but no strong recommendation either way for what to do with that right now.
Okay. There's other questions. Well, Mark, move on to unless there's other questions, move on to I guess the buildable lots part.
Well, I just had one. On the
right.
property you're talking about, Mayor, that is adjacent currently to the concrete builder there. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yes.
Is it possible that he may want to utilize that and add on?
It could be, and it's zoned appropriately for that.
He's not like a major concrete. He's just basically a more or less a builder than anything else. So I don't think he would.
Some of the conversation we would have going forward after tonight is to talk to adjacent property owners, find out if they'd be interested in it. If they're not, then, what's the future plan the city has for it? And Yeah, some of that strategic outreach to, because right now they're costing us money to maintain them. So the idea is to put them back into productive use as appropriate.
300%.
Okay, Mark?
Okay, so
Sorry,
oh,
sorry, Kelly, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, could you repeat, what you were saying about the ones that would fall within the Orchard East, plan?
Yeah, so there's 5 properties that are owned by the city within either on the Winchester, non-conforming, that are along Winchester or within the Orchard East neighborhood. And the idea would be to, as we do the Orchard East sub-area plan, sort of like what we did with Lazy Boy, figure out what the best use for those parcels would be, and then develop a plan for what to do with those going forward.
Even the ones that are, next to the owner occupied, we won't be considering those at all?
Strategically, I think we'd want to take a look at that. I know there was one property that they wanted to build a parking lot on it. And so I think, those are individual items that we would have to take a look at. If they're owner occupied, certainly, and that would fall within that, the discussion of if it's adjacent to an owner occupied property, then, offer it.
That one at Third and Conant,
Third and Conant.
just took that property down not too long ago.
Yep, yeah.
So would that be on hold until we go further into this sub-area plan?
Recommend we do that, but if there's interest by the adjoining city property owner right now, then we could have entertain those discussions.
Is that conforming or non-conforming, that lot?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll look at it as we go through. Because
I didn't memorize them all off the top of my head yet. I'd have to
Just a
look
few
back
to
at the
remember.
map and compare it to the spreadsheet, but. So there's 38 conforming buildable lots that were identified, and 24 of the parcels are identified as opportunities for residential or commercial infill development. This does include the High property and the remaining Mason Run property, which we would recommend be marketed for redevelopment through the RFP process simply due to the nature of their size and characteristics. It's not necessarily a single lot in the middle of a residential neighborhood, but they're larger properties that are zoned for residential. So those we would recommend putting out an RFP to either bring residential development in or finish development such as the Mason Run neighborhood. One of the sites that certainly want to have some discussion about is the 7-acre former DPS yard on Winchester Street. Again, recommendation from administration would be to take a look at this site as part of the Orchard East sub-area or Orchard East master plan, as well as the Heritage Corridor master plan update. Those are 2 master plans which will kind of overlap in that area because of its proximity to Plum Creek, but also due to its closeness in the Orchard East neighborhood. So taking a look at what the future use for that rather large site at the south boundary of the city should be. Also, we'd have to take a look at what sort of environmental conditions may exist on that site as well to determine whether it should be incorporated as part of the Heritage Corridor or developed for residential or a combination of both. So my recommendation would be as we go through those processes to set forth a vision for that property. There are 5 other conforming parcels along Winchester corridor, which should be reviewed for recommendation in the Orchard East master plan as well. And you'll notice a lot of it, you'll see on the map, a lot of these properties are concentrated in the 3rd precinct and in the Orchard East neighborhood. So the remaining sites that we should retain ownership of for future strategic purposes includes the Triangle property that you'll see on the screen now, in terms of its the need to use that as part of the I-75 interchange modification project potentially as we realign Front Street. And then also there is a site, and we're in discussions with DTE about the development of a replacement substation to replace the one along Front Street to meet increased capacity in the city. And so there's one parcel we've identified for that possibly. And then the properties that are immediately adjacent to the Opportunity Center and Navarre Library, of course, we've looked at those for part of that expansion project. And then there is one piece of property on Jones Avenue that's right next to the DPS yard that we should retain because it does have a cell phone tower on it that we should, that the city does receive revenue from as well. So leading to that, 24 out of the 38 conforming lots could be identified and should be marketed for residential or commercial infill development across the city. And then the remaining just laid out the recommendation in terms of the DPS yard, the Orchard East master plan, and then the 4 strategies. So.
Can you zoom into the Opportunity Center, Mark?
Yeah.
So we've got, out of that entire block, the only thing that we don't own is the accounting office and the learning center.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. And then can you scroll up to the north? And then these lots, you're basically going to hold off until we do the sub-area plan?
Yeah, that's our recommendation.
I can see that. Oh, you have the sub-area plan, and then you also have the update of the
Heritage Corridor.
corridor.
Yeah.
And those properties may factor into that as well.
They could, yeah. So I mean, particularly in the area of Franklin Street and, some that we do have to take a look at. There's you'll see the little red strip that runs along East First Street. That's, it's a strip of property next to the Salvation Army. Jim's Towing uses it a lot, but that's city owned. And then that triangle behind it, what should we do with that property? Should we give it to the Salvation Army? Should we hang on to it? I think those are the discussions we want to look at with the Winchester corridor plan. And then the smaller properties, you see scattered through between Front Street and Franklin Street. We've had, for this property in particular, 1020 Humphrey, I've had a couple requests for that because the adjacent property is for sale. And a couple of the prospective buyers have called. One just wanted to flip the property, and I told them we would entertain discussion with whoever the permanent eventual owner ends up being. Some of them, I know there's the Highlander Market at the corner of Front in Winchester. He has called wanting to purchase all the city-owned property around him to build a parking lot. That was the one I was referring to. I told them we were completing this analysis and would take direction from City Council on what they wanted to do with those. And then the remaining properties, there's the one next to the Franklin Street Church. We could offer it to the church, or, the options are kind of limited for surrounding. And then the 2 properties on East Front Street that are back to back to each other. Those could either be combined together for one lot, or divided and offered to the adjacent property owners if they're owner occupied.
So, go ahead, John.
Mayor, Ed, we carry the high property that shows up in our audit as a large asset. You know what the amount is on that?
Yeah, it does show up on the general fund balance sheet basically as an asset at $800,000. $800,000.
And I will say specifically for the conforming infill residential development lots, so the green outline lots that are scattered throughout the city, I do have a prospective developer who's interested in building single-family housing on those lots. And they know we're having this conversation tonight. And also had some discussion with somebody who may be interested in completing Mason Run as well. And I've had some discussions and contact with somebody who's interested in senior independent living on the high property. Although the challenges with that is they want higher visibility. And So I'm not sure that one's going to come across. But so I say all that there is interest in the development community to move some of these lots off the city's books and achieve our purposes.
Your Honor.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mark, what about the property that we owned, the very southwest corner of the city by Western and Winston? That park that we decommissioned.
Corner. So that one's not on here because it's a designated park. And so that it fell off the list, but I was thinking about that before I came down here. I know I did have the adjacent property owner contact wanting to purchase that property at one time, but that is a conforming lot, although it's a designated park right now.
Buildable lot.
It is.
So that could still be in play.
It could be, yeah.
Everybody's looking at the kind of the maps, looking at different ones. If there's any questions, just raise your hand, I guess. So, Mark, I guess in a general sense, looking at, because kind of there, as you said, kind of the toward the east is a lot of individual lots. I'm just going to go say between 3rd and 1st and Half Street, and I guess it's both sides of Kentucky, like that square. Looking at those smaller squares, so you're looking for. I guess what you're saying is those are buildable. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And yep. The opportunities there for, I guess, up to the council to entertain, building of those or multiple ones or different opportunities. Will those all go out, do you think, as a bid, or are we accepting interest? Or, I mean, I could see where somebody just individually won, but you're really trying to package them as we talked about.
Yep.
In numbers.
So the developer that I talked to recently, I provided him with a list of all the conforming residential city-owned properties, and he's identified 14 that he may be interested in to start with. And so, I'd like to entertain his discussion, find out what the 14 are, and then we have to figure out what to do with the remaining ones and what to do with those. But generally, I mean, if there's somebody who's interested in a package of 14, then, do we just list the remaining ones for sale? Do we work with a realtor to sell those and get those off our rolls? Or, how to proceed with those, I think, is something we'd want to take a look at.
Because as we started this, I've had contact from a couple, I'll say individuals or groups that are also, because we've had the conversation over the months of, well, what are you going to do and when are you going to do it? And they just said, well, it's coming up. And so if they're not watching now, I'm sure they'll catch it on the replay. But so I think there may be more contacts with you as well. But that's what I'm curious how it's going to be packaged. And I think we're just kind of open to that right now and hear what council has to say as well. But I mean, some developers could, if somebody was to take them all, that's going to take a while for somebody to do that. Whereas I think if you had multiple and somebody's able to do, say 4 or 5 and somebody's able to do 10, and then we're getting them done by multiple groups to get them done quicker and have more builds and more available properties for sale, and which means, of course, become taxable too.
Yeah, and there's got to be discussion with developers as well to make sure what they're proposing fits with the neighborhood, that they're not trying to stick a sore thumb in the middle of a neighborhood and build something that doesn't match. And so there's some of that working through the proposals too that we would work through.
Yeah, we'd look for, you want that modular drop next to some homes that might be 2 stories, and why is that there, and but there's those margins on bills we talked about as a council of how do we move the property forward to get a benefit of a build, ownership, and taxable property, and where's the margin we benefit when we work with individuals. Kelly.
Is the Mako property in, or is that pulled off the table?
I didn't include that on here because we don't technically own it. We've got the option to purchase it, but we don't own it.
And then just keeping in mind when we're talking about developers, so what I've recognized is a severe housing crisis in the city. And I know this administration wants to focus on owner occupied, but hopefully with all these properties, we can take advantage of that housing shortage that exists in the city right now. I don't know exactly how, but
Yeah, this analysis was specifically for the onesie twosie lots, I call them, that are around the city that are, single residential lots to address the housing issue. And certainly, I had a discussion with somebody about rentals lately, and I said the city is not against rentals. It's the manner and the location in which they are. And, we've had discussions on a few different properties that are larger that the city owns that, could fit some multifamily rental housing and things of that sort. And we're engaged in discussions with developers on those. I mean, the Mako site was one of those options and alternatives, but these were specifically just to look at the smaller lots that the city owns. Certainly I know I handed you quite a list. And so take a look at it. I provided, working with Vince and others at the city, about what a recommendation for each and every single parcel could be or should be. But, those are just recommendations. So open to hearing as you go through that list and go through it. And I can send you a link to this map as well, so you can play around with it and manipulate it too. But as you analyze it and look at the ones that are either in your precinct or across the city and have other ideas, certainly let me know. Let Vince or I know.
I see that the 24 that you mentioned were identified. I'm sure that you may get some other calls as well, follow-ups now that we've had this work session discussion, that it may be of an interest to talk about whatever number they may feel they have the ability to carry through with, or have an interest to build.
Yeah, and having feedback from city council would be helpful as I have these discussions about what is the general overall policy. If it's a non-conforming lot, is it one, if the owner next door calls and they're interested in it, I can give them some guidance that, yeah, city council would be interested in entertaining that discussion. Or if it's conforming, if it's a buildable lot and it's next to them and they'd like to own that as well. I know in the past, what we've done with non-conforming lots, sometimes we split them up and offer them at no fee to the adjacent property owner. But if it's conforming and they're asking just to take ownership of it, what's council's desire for those ones? Some of that overall direction discussion, I think, is where we'd like to go from here.
And I know, Mark, I'm sorry, I'll get you, the conversation about, where that person may be in relation to, their current property and taxes paid or not paid. And if they've back taxes, it doesn't seem to that, okay, we'll make this even more so when, they're kind of having struggles with the property they have. Not that it'd be that much, maybe less more or taxable. We want to generate the revenue as well. And it is about home ownership. It's about home resident use. There's a whole variety of things I think we can meet with this as we get through this. So Andrew's patiently waiting. I forgot.
Thank you, sir. I seem to have played some part in prompting this study. I'm happy that we were able to do it. I'm impressed that we were able to do it. I'm glad that it was done internally with all the talents and resources that our city and staff has to offer. I'm sure that this second page here probably is what you've spent a great deal of time here, the second and third pages, and I'm sure that you've had conversations, Mr. Cochran, with many developers who've come in asking about projects that, are going on in the city and potential areas for development. And these, this is probably something that's existed on your desktop in some form or fashion for a while now. I'm glad that we all can be looking at the same piece of paper now and looking at all the roles that each of these properties have to play. If the city has a particular plan, if you're looking for general policy, I can certainly give my feeling on this, and I think it's the same feeling that prompted the initiation of the study to begin with. If we have a plan for the property that is defined, I don't mind keeping it around on our books. If we do not, I am not a huge fan of being a steward of vacant property and keeping it from development. So I'm very happy to hear from you that there seems to be a general recommendation of divestment of city property where we can put those parcels to very good use. You would ask the question of non-conforming lots. There are certainly those odds and ends here and there that are 2 feet wide and 30 feet long, and I'm happy just giving those to whatever owner occupied, resident lives nearby. I think that the owner occupied route is a wise one. I think it's going to keep the property cohesive, which was probably, part of what led to these issues in the first place. And then I know that especially for our rental-owned property, the landlords, especially who do not live in town, when we review our fees for grass mowing and late taxes and everything else, there is a epidemic of absenteeism, and the renters who own properties who don't live in the city themselves are disproportionately more likely to find themselves on those sorts of lists. So I very much agree with your owner-occupied route on that.
Yeah.
For other non-conforming lots, well, I'll let you, did you
I
have
was just going to
something
say, when I looked at whether the adjacent property was owner occupied or not, most of them were out of town property owners, and that's the
Bingo.
basis for the recommendation. If it was a local, the one woman that I did talk to who was interested in buying the property, her landlord lived the next street over, and he said, I've always maintained it, and it's a reasonable request and accommodation. But again, and she was in the process of purchasing it, but yeah, generally most of them were out of town or out of state property owners that were renting out.
I'll back you on that decision all day long. There are some other non-conforming properties that are just a few feet short of the, is it 40 width needed? 40 width
Depends on the
frontage?
zoning, yeah.
Yeah. That they find themselves at like 37 or something, and you have a couple of those in a row, and maybe it's worth, splitting one of them up to save the rest of them. So I think that especially where they come close, I'm not just willing to forego the fees, give it away, and now you have one house instead of two. I don't know that I'm quite ready to do that yet. I want to look more at what our options are regarding those. But I think that a lot of those we want to hold off anyway because of two pending studies that the city is undergoing at this point in time. But I'm very glad to see this happen. I'm very glad to have this before us here.
Well, and we've been acquiring more and more properties lately through the tax sale or the tax foreclosure and knocking the properties down. I think it was very much time to have the discussion of what are we going to do with them and not continue to maintain those in perpetuity into the future, but what's the plan to reactivate those, so to speak. And a lot of people, the residents that call the adjacent property owners, they just want a bigger yard, or they want to be able to build a garage or something like that. And that's understandable in some of the neighborhoods, so.
Other questions or thoughts or?
I'm just
Kelly.
curious, and this might be getting a little further down the line on this, but you brought up the absentee landlords. What are we doing about these? Because I've noticed a lot of people, and I'll check, and a lot of them live out county, so they still need to come here to do business, and they are neglecting the properties. Are we doing? Some of these people are they've been doing it for decades. I mean, we putting a hammer down on anybody, or what is in our rights to do when you have those chronically negligent landlords?
Yeah, I'm gonna look to Miss O'Brien a little bit. I know part of the initiative that we've had lately in terms of strengthening the rental inspection program and the blight abatement program and things of that sort, and standing that program up a little bit stronger with the help certainly of Miss O'Brien and council deputizing her as the deputy city attorney, I think it was. Assistant, and looking at cracking down on more of that and looking at the neighborhoods and how we improve, even if they are rentals, and cracking down on that absenteeism. So I know with some of the projects and internal organization processes in the future are gonna have more of a focus on the rental inspection and blight abatement for that very, very issue.
Just wait and pause. Oh, yes, Kelly, thank you. Just see if there's other questions.
It's a long list. It's a lot to take in.
I think it's, as we've talked about for a while, this wealth I mean, you can get it from a list by the property numbers, and it tells you whether what's it zoned, and I think your information about whether it's, you know, property being planned for or property that may not fit in because it's already designated for future use. But I think then they get to the maps and it shows the kind of the greens and the reds, but the idea is that somebody that may have an interest can see where those are at, plus those you've been in contact with.
Just out of curiosity, since it does seem like we have a little bit of time.
We do.
The 3 parcels on North Dixie that are on the screen now, any initial thoughts on those?
Yeah, I think at one time, one of the building owners up there was going to sell the front property, and they were looking to do the back part. Had to do with, I think, dog training and different things, but they've moved on to a different location.
Is that right there where the little strip store is?
It's behind it. So the strip unit that you're talking about is it's the gray long piece to the right. That's where the Eddie's restaurant, I think, and Jake's Liquor. And so these are the parcels, and then there's the bar next to that, and it's the 3 parcels in between, but that's where the underpass starts going, and so you can't access them from North Dixie, and you have to navigate a little bit.
It's a little locked in because you'd have to figure how to get with the other, the houses that are in the front there by the Dixie Drive, and then the other building that goes around the curve.
Yeah, there's the houses, and then I think it's a medical office, or it just sold,
Transition.
that access to get in there.
Commercial or residential?
It's zoned Dixie Highway Commercial Corridor in the new zoning code.
I would say try to sell the property if we could, because it's not something really we could utilize, not now and not in the future.
Yeah, it's a surplus lots. And like I said, being across the street from Heck Park, I think we could utilize that greater for the entryway monument signage project that we're looking at, because that side of the street is what you see when you're coming into the city anyway, and not looking up to the left. But okay. What about the old DPS yard? Any thoughts on that?
I think personally, I think you need to wait until you get the sub-area plan done.
It's a large lot when I see that, and I know it abuts Plum Creek. I know there's discussion with the National Park and kind of the south gateway entrance to the National Park properties. It has a historic significance, but when you look at how far that goes, it also has a residential component potentially as you go north. I could see a combination of those of, you know, securing the lot because we're talking about already with the FEMA grant on across Kentucky, and that we received that grant for improvements around the park and related to the national park. And this, going back to this lot, it backs up there to Plum Creek, but also the International Wildlife Refuge is a component there as well. So you wouldn't necessarily want to put a house necessarily right next to the wildlife refuge. Then how would people access? I think there's some development opportunities with the national park at the southern end. And as we continue to move forward up the street, it would fill the street instead of having half a street. But I think it's a matter of how much space that plan may show. But also keep in mind that there's some potential here for, you know, it could be residential or other expansion of properties that are there, because the top, I'll say, box there around Kentucky, it's going to be hard to access unless there's a way to get back in there without a road or a side road or something. But I think that's all part of that discussion. I think I see a mix potentially.
Is that only accessible through Winchester?
Yes. Yeah, because the railroad tracks right along Kentucky there, and then just the height of it and going over. But yeah, thanks, Mark. That's helpful. So you can see there's Mark, is that an alleyway there that's kind of off the top?
Here?
No, down at the very top. I'm looking at that upper box up there.
Right.
See it coming behind the houses and stuff. And
Right here?
No, the other way, going
North
and south. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, right here.
You know, so it just, you know, is there potential or possibilities that, because otherwise, how do you access that kind of that elongated rectangular square?
At one time, when there was discussion about getting rid of the track along Kentucky, the idea was to have Winchester, or Kentucky, get rid of the grade, because the railroad track wouldn't be there, and take Kentucky and then blend it right into Winchester. So that way you come off the expressway, and then it would be a loop right onto Winchester, right on up to Dixie, and then right back on the expressway. But
Yeah.
the rail line's still there, but that was one of the ideas.
But as you go down there and the other ones, in the individual lots that are there, probably were residential at one time.
Yep.
You know, the DPS, you can see still the foundation parts there. But you get to where the buildings are and back down this way, I think that's, you know, it's gotta be accessible, if it's part of the, I'll say the historic development. But at the same time, I'm not sure that all that space would be used for that. I think there's potential for some residential there.
That doesn't run right into the potential belt greenway that was.
No, that
Yes.
yeah, over to between the tracks there. But then there, you talk about that and how to connect that, then the greenways to that southern, where the DPS lot is, what, you know, that still have to make that connection too at some time.
Yeah, this is the planned greenway here, and then we'd ideally like to connect it to the Plum Creek unit of the Wildlife Refuge, and also to Plum Creek Park here, which is the city-owned park, and where the mayor referenced, we have a FEMA grant to do some property acquisition in that area. And so, yeah, we'd like to take a look at how we connect these two along with the International Wildlife Refuge. Whoops.
Yeah.
They definitely could use some cleaning up, I tell you.
Yeah. Okay.
Other questions or thoughts on any of the lots or specific areas? There's a lot here, Mark, and I appreciate the work that you've done and the staff as well, and assessing all the help that you received along the way. But,
Yep.
you know, it gives time to look at this as well, and maybe coming back at another time here in the near future, if as you get contacts, and maybe it's something reporting out of the person that you have spoke to or others that may, and say, well, now we, you know, the 24 is not the issues. How do we then, as Councilman Feller said, how do we get these other moved along, and the best way to do that? But the buildable lots and the housing for all purposes is probably kind of what we're looking at. All right. Any other questions? I don't see any. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it. So Mr. Sell, anything further?
Don't have anything further. I think it's just open for discussion items at this point.
But there was, when we were doing the draft, there was a couple other topics, but Mr. Pastu is not here, and I think so there's going to be some follow-up on those topics, so we're not going to have the conversation this evening. Any items, I guess, from council for Mr. Sell, or even looking forward into our council agenda? Is there any items that you might have a question about? I think clerk, maybe you want to make that announcement of one of the items. We'll have to make sure the council takes some action.
Sure, we will need to amend the agenda. Item 3362 under presentation, which was recognition for Scott Smiley. That's been pushed back to the December 20th meeting, so we will need to amend the agenda to remove that.
379 to have it.
3362.
Oh, I'm sorry, I had the wrong one. You're right.
Okay.
362, the recognition presentation. Thank you.
But other than that, I don't have any other adjustments that I'm aware of.
Just make a note as we could get to that meeting, particularly that item as we, at the start of the meeting, regarding approval of the regular agenda, we make the amendment to pull that till the, postpone it till the December 20th meeting. Any items on the agenda? The council may have a question for Mr. Sell at this time. If not, I know we have a few items we carried over from last meeting and be able to take care of those. So we have plenty of time, so I think I'm get ready for the meeting. So at this time, if there's no questions, we'll adjourn. We'll adjourn the work session. Thank you, and thanks again, Mark, and Barry as well for your presentations. Okay, we'll be back here in just before 7:30.